hopefully everyone's having a good week. Hopefully the assignments this week were more straightforward. I noticed I got fewer questions, and I also noticed that there was just a lot more participation on Carmen, so I'm really happy to see that. Here I am, coming live to you from my fiance's parents' basement. So my recording setup is a little different than usual, but it's quite a lovely quite lovely ambiance. And without further ado, I will go over your discussions because it looks like you had some pretty good uh, discussion material this week. So I'll just go over the questions. So the first question that you guys were supposed to answer was, how many tools did Bruce Bradley make in the field? And there was some disagreement on that one. And to be honest, it's hard to tell. It was 5 or 6. But that's not really the point. The point is that he made a lot of tools using just this obsidian core, and then he used this large flake to continuously create what he needed, or what he would have needed in the field, to process a large animal and bring it home. It's really pretty interesting that you can do all of this with just this solid chunk of rock, and that's essentially the point of that question. How many tools were available for archaeologists to find? That would be, I think, ultimately just one, right? Because he continuously processed that large flake over and over again as he used it. And even though that he made 5 or 6 different tools overall, he continuously created. Well, he was processing the same tool, so archaeologists wouldn't have been able to find anything more than the spear point at the very end of the film. And this obviously has implications for archaeologists, right? Because they don't find all the tools that have ever been created throughout time. They just find what's left over. So in a lot of cases, when we're out in the field excavating, we just don't know. We don't have the clearest image of what would have been going on in the past. And that's honestly an unfortunate part of archaeology, because you're never really playing with all of the pieces to the puzzle. But it's also what makes it kind of interesting. And this next question, you guys had a lot of good discussion on, why didn't he flute his point? And this is kind of brings up this whole conversation in archaeology and anthropology in general, because some of you guys said he didn't flute his point because it was too thin. The flake probably would have broken if he fluted his point, and he didn't want to risk that. And some of you other guys said that he didn't flute his point because he wasn't used to making fluted spear points, so he just didn't do it. And this is kind of interesting because it's indicative of this debate in anthropology, whether you take a functionalist approach at analyzing the past or an ideological one. Because maybe he just didn't do it because, his culture, or maybe he just didn't do it because it wasn't logical for him to do it. It just didn't make any sense functionally. And I mean, I think he says in the film that he just does it that way because that's kind of how he's been doing it, his entire life. But the point is that we don't really know for sure. I mean, it could have been if he wasn't Bruce Bradley and he was a hunter in the past, maybe he would make spear points a certain way because that's how he was taught how to make spear points, and he just kind of does it because of a shared culture that he has with his group. Or maybe there's a functional explanation, or maybe it's a little bit of both. So it really just depends on which side of the argument you're on, and they're not even mutually exclusive. So that really was a roundabout way of saying could have been function and it could have been culture, or it could have been both. What would an archaeologist find at the site 1,000 years from now? I mean, ultimately, probably a lot of flakes and that single tool. But this question also brings up a deeper discussion as well. Is that, like I said before, you have to keep in mind that things that were initially there during the production of whatever probably won't be there 1,000 years from now. We have to deal with all of these processes like erosion. I mean, there's a word for it in archaeology. It's called taphonomy, which is the study of what happens after something is, deposited in the ground, basically. And a lot of things happen. So we would probably find flakes, but we really don't know. Maybe we won't find anything. And that happens all the time. What did Bruce Bradley learn from experimental archaeology that he couldn't just learn from studying stone tools and debitage? There wasn't like a lot of discussion around this, probably because it was relatively straightforward, but he learned ultimately how to create tools reminiscent of the way that people would have done it in the past, right? So he doesn't just have this sort of secondhand knowledge of flint knapping based on books he's read or lectures he's gone to. He has firsthand knowledge based on him spending years practicing this craft that he's obviously very passionate about. And there's definitely a lot of value in that because, you learn things that you might not know otherwise. Especially when he's talking about the different angles that you hit the rock at with your hammer, and he has an idea of how the rock is going to fracture and flake. So those are things that you would only get through experimental archaeology. A couple questions left. This one definitely sparked some debate. If Bruce Bradley didn't leave tools behind, just debitage, would we understand what culture or time period they came from? Some people said maybe, if we had we have technology that allows us to do that. And the answer kind of is just no, unfortunately. We might understand regionally where the things came from, right? Because we know where certain rocks are found, but we just don't know anything about the culture because we don't have any stylistic evidence. I think somebody put in their discussion that the process of flint knapping is pretty much the same cross-culturally, and that's true. Depending on, you end up with different things if you're in different cultures after creating, spear points, for example, but the process of getting there is pretty much the same universally. So if we just had debitage, we wouldn't really know. And for the last question, if Bruce Bradley left behind his broken projectile point, killed the animal, and a collector picked it up as a souvenir, would we understand what culture or time period they came from? And this one also sparked a good amount of debate. And the answer is maybe. It's really hard to say because, like I said before, there's cultural commonalities when it comes to spear points. We have ideas of shared groups that made spear points a certain way, and if we find them spear points that look that way in a specific location, we know that they're probably from XYZ culture. But then maybe not, right? Because the spear point might be completely taken out of context. A lot of people brought that up. If it was found someplace completely different than where it was deposited, we might have no idea, or we might misinterpret the evidence because we might think it's from a different culture because it was found somewhere completely different. So that's why, and this is sort of a running theme throughout the class that you're gonna hear, but that's why context is just so important. It's not just the tools, or it doesn't have to be tools, but it's not just the archaeological evidence itself that's important. It's the context, which is why if you don't have the context, you can't really say a whole lot meaningful about a given, archaeological find. It's not I don't know, I'm trying to think of a classic, Indiana Jones, he's a archaeologist from University of Chicago, he's oh, this is from this time period at here, you might know that to a certain degree, but if you don't have where the thing's buried, you just can't say anything truly meaningful about what was going on in the past at a site. And that's what archaeologists care about, right? We care about uncovering what really happened in the past, even though we don't have a clear snapshot into the past, which makes it difficult. But once again, as I said before, it makes it really interesting. And that's all I've got for you guys this week. I'm going to make another video actually here shortly to introduce this next week's material. I'm going to I'm gonna start doing that just for your benefit. So I hope everyone has a good week, and feel free to reach out with any questions about the assignments. Thanks.